Makeshift Stories is a labor of love, created independently without paid staff or budget. We rely on our community to help us grow. So, if our stories spark your imagination, we'd be grateful if you could help spread the word and tell a friend or another story lover about us. Thanks for being part of our journey.
Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere at some time along an infinite line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable.
Makeshift Stories presents Episode 299, Escape Across the 60th, read by Alan V. Hare. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdmann. Somewhere and sometime, when you're out of options, help might come from an unexpected source. Pain shot up my back. My head bounced off a boulder. The current was grinding me into the rocky riverbed, and I was about to die. I tried to convince myself to hold my breath as long as possible, and failed. What was the point? I opened my mouth, expecting my lungs to fill with water. Instead, there was air. Tug, my arm was being pulled. Tug. Something was jerking me away from the rushing water. My hands burned with cold and my teeth chattered. I was alive. I opened one eye to a blurry apparition. What? A rubber tongue frantically licked my face. It was cold like the water, flesh without warmth. I raised a hand to deflect it, tried to gasp for air, choked and coughed up water instead, gagging until I rolled onto my side. 4 wet fur-covered legs ending in titanium and carbon fiber paws danced anxiously on the rocks beside me. The tongue found my face again. A wagging makeshift metal tail dusted the rocks behind it. Standing beside me was an old first-gen Luna robotic dog. With a DIY tail? There was only one I knew of. Loki, is that you, Loki? The dogbot stopped, mechanical ears rotating forward. It dropped down and stared at me with bright blue video eyes. It wasn't Loki. Something caught the bot's attention. It licked me again, then galloped back into the icy river. I rubbed the numbness out of my hands and pulled myself up against a rock. The shivering came in uncontrollable waves. As the dogbot, rope in mouth, pulled my Zodiac back to shore, jerking and paddling until its paws touched the bottom. It had been 3 weeks since I had left the reclamation zone, Mary, its caretaker, and her dogbot Loki. Loki was one of the few original Luna patrol bots still in the field, except for the one currently tugging my boat to shore, and up until now the only dogbot someone had cared enough about to fashion a tail for. This one had a tail too. The dog finished dragging the boat onto the rocks and looked at me expectantly. Good dog. It wagged its tail and barked as I stumbled up, then collapsed in pain when I put weight on my left foot. It's okay, pal. I got to my knees and crawled toward the beached Zodiac. I need dry clothes from the boat. It was hard to speak through chattering teeth. The bot loped over, letting me use her back to steady myself. Together, we wobbled over to the Zodiac. It had flipped in the rapids. Mary had been right. The river was too dangerous for someone like me with no wilderness experience. Her words were more pertinent now than when they were said. "What are you doing here?" she had demanded. I'm headed to Fort Smith in the Arctic Alliance. I stuttered. The border? There's no road to get there. I know. I'm going by river. I've brought an inflatable. Are you crazy? She laughed. It's the only unmonitored place to sneak across the 60th parallel. I intend to claim asylum. Even if you survive the trip, they'll just send you back. The Arctic Alliance doesn't want to make waves with the Great Plains Economic Zone. They'll let me in. I've got something to trade. A gene mod to cure Alzheimer's. I'm a geneticist. I worked for Advanced Global Health Systems and was in the process of open sourcing the cure when Global's corporate security showed up to stop me. I ran because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life locked up in some isolated desert research campus to pay off some bogus debt or fine. It's forced labor, and they never let anyone out. And you picked the most obscure route you could find, through the reclamation zone, down the Athabasca River, across the big lake, then on to the Slave. Not an easy trip. You're either extremely desperate or crazy. Desperate, I explained. But she had been right. It was a crazy thing to try, and I had been lucky to have made it to the Slave River. The first significant rapids I encountered had turned into a disaster. Leaning against the Zodiac, Mary had helped me steal. It was self-evident how insane I had been to believe I could make the trip in an inflatable rubber raft. If I made it across the border, and it was indeed an if, I'd have to find some way to thank her. I was shivering again. The sun, low in the northern October sky, had gone behind a cloud, and the temperature plummeted. I needed to get dry and warm, fast. My remaining supplies were still in the Zodiac, secured in waterproof bags. Anything loose had been swept away in the river when I hit the submerged rock and capsized. Thankfully, the case with the small propane heater and the new Arctic tent I had bought at Fort Chipewyan was still there. It had been a risk going into the isolated town on the north shore of Lake Athabasca, but it had become obvious I wouldn't make the border before the first snow, and I was woefully underprepared for winter. The town had an airstrip which put it within reach of the private security firm my former employer had hired to stop me. Did SynthBio have electronic tentacles in such a remote place? I had been careful to use cash and a false name, but a stranger in a small town? I claimed I was a hobbyist photographer there to capture the beauty of the northern fall, but maybe the clerk hadn't believed me. The RoboDog helped me drag the tent to a dry clearing further up the bank from the rocks. By the time I had it set up, my thoughts were getting muddled, and I started to take my wet clothes off outside the tent. The dog barked at me, nipping my legs and forcing me inside. It grabbed the zipper in its mouth and sealed the opening. Slipping out of my soaked gear, I fell asleep wrapped in a thermal blanket the dog had pulled from the Zodiac. When I woke, the tiny tent was warm. The propane heater. In my hypothermic delirium, had I brought it into the tent? I was lucky to be alive. My eyes darted around in the gloom, finding nothing but the RoboDog lying in front of the zipper door. Its mechanical ears twitched, and it raised its head off its front paws. I hadn't taken a close look at the bot. It was definitely an old Luna Industrial Patrol dog, which someone had partially covered in synthetic fur and added the tail, just like Mary, the reclamation zone caretaker, had done with Loki. Was it one of her dogs? What was it doing here? There was no charging port, so how was it powered, and how could it make it up here on a single charge? I brushed my hand along its back, and the bot responded by stretching. Its back was hot to the touch. I pulled back my hand with a yelp. There were cooling fins hidden in the synthetic fur near its haunches. "What you got there, pal?" The dog rolled onto its side, revealing a yellow nuclear symbol on its chest, which the bot had tried to scratch off. The thing had a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. Only a few bots had been made with them before the technology had been outlawed, and I was sharing a tiny tent with one. That was why it was warm inside. The generators threw off a lot of heat. "So you're on the run too, pal?" If the authorities ever found a free-range nuke-powered dog bot, they would decommission it and bury its generator in a secure disposal site. The bot tilted its head and looked at me. "Guess we're both outlaws," I said, reaching over and scratching it behind the ears. "What's your name, pal?" It had a barely readable tag on a weathered leather collar that said Loki, Beta, property of Reclamation Zone 1. So the bot had once been Mary's. Had she sent it away to protect it? I tried to get up and pain knifed through my left ankle. "I've sprained it, Loki." The dog bot offered her back for support, helping me shift my weight, then licked my ankle until I fell asleep. The next morning, with my ankle in a slippery light dusting of snow, it took longer than I wanted to pack up, but it was good to get back in the Zodiac and on my way again. Loki looked at me, then jumped in. "Are you sure, pal?" I asked. It wagged its tail. "Let's go then." I pushed off with an oar, and the river's current took us. We lay back to enjoy the ride until a distant VTOL heading toward Fort Chipewyan appeared in the sky. The clerk at the outfitting store had claimed the airport had been closed for 2 years. There was only one reason someone would send such an expensive machine so far into the wilderness. "Hope we have a big enough head start, pal. They'll be out searching before nightfall." Pain shot through my ankle as I turned away, reminding me that I had more immediate problems than corporate security agents. Scrounging around, I found a small emergency pouch strapped under one of the seats and used the elastic bandage to wrap my swollen ankle. Loki Beta watched from the bow of the Zodiac, the luminous radiation symbol on her chest glowing in the morning sun. "Loki, can I call you Loki?" Its tail swished. "Okay, then Loki it is. Loki here." The dogbot jumped over the middle seat, landed beside me, and barked. "Sit." She settled on her haunches. I took one of the larger adhesive bandages, stripped off the backing, and pasted it over the radiation symbol. "There, it's harder to see now." Loki woofed and wagged her tail. We made significant progress, at least 20 kilometers before the sun began to dip below the trees. Sensing what we needed to do, Loki jumped to the bow of the Zodiac, barking and pointing to help navigate the jagged banks to a small sandy beach nestled between 2 large boulders. We landed, and Loki jumped out. With her nose to the ground, the dogbot began sniffing around the edge of the clearing. For the briefest moment, there was a distant buzz, like the blades of several drones or late summer wasps. We froze and looked at the sky. Nothing. Then I caught the glint of a small airship on the southern horizon, the uncrewed type used to relay signals and provide surveillance. Since the Kessler Syndrome event 20 years ago, when all near-Earth satellites were destroyed in a massive chain reaction, no one has been able to launch replacements. Consequently, airships and balloons replaced orbital platforms. Drone airships don't randomly float over places like this, Loki. The dog's ears flattened. I shouldn't have stopped in that town. Now they know where I am. Are you sure you want to come with me? Your life is on the line if they catch us. Loki tilted her head. How much language did the old model comprehend? I quickly covered the Zodiac as best I could with spruce boughs the dog helped drag out of the brush. They didn't entirely hide the little craft, but made it harder to see from a distance. Hoping that would be enough, I set up the tent in the trees so it couldn't be seen from above. A fire was out of the question, so I huddled beside Loki's radiators and ate part of a cold, dehydrated meal. A couple of hours later, Loki's growling woke me. It was dark, and something was moving outside the tent's thin nylon walls. The robo-dog became frantic, pawing at the door. I unzipped it, and we squirted out into the cold dark as the side of the tent caved in. Forgetting my ankle, I tried to stand up. The pain was immediate, making me stumble backwards and fall to the ground, facing the now collapsed tent. Something large and black was ripping through the fabric. Loki didn't hesitate. It leapt at the black shadow, titanium teeth bared. Startled, the bear looked up, the remains of my opened freeze-dried food package in its mouth. I had left the uneaten portion in the tent. It defiantly stood its ground as Loki charged. At the last second, the bear turned and lumbered into the bush. Loki waited at the edge of our campsite until she was sure the beast wasn't coming back, then came over and licked my face. "Nice work, pal. That was my fault. I should have put the food back in the sealed container." The dogbot pawed my arm. Let's see what's left of the tent, I suggested. The bear hadn't mauled it as badly as I thought. The hungry animal had just chewed a hole where the open food pack had been lying against the side. However, we spent the rest of the night in the Zodiac. I packed up in the dark the following day and was ready to leave by sunrise. Just as I pushed off from the shore, Loki's ears swiveled south. "Another bear?" I asked. Then I heard the faint sound too, a distant whine of small propeller blades spinning up. "They'll find the camp, Loki. We need to hurry." I pushed out into the current, looking for the fastest flow. Ahead, the river split into two channels around an island. The smaller one meandered around, while the larger one charged through a rocky gap and down a visible slope, water curdling on the rocks. An old log caught in the current upstream was swept into the foaming turbulence, disappearing until it shot out the bottom. Loki shifted anxiously from one side of the boat to the other. Her head suddenly jerked around, and she stared at the horizon behind us. A swarm of tiny black dots appeared just over the treetops where we had been camping. We had no choice. I steered into the fast-moving current above the rock-lined channel and hoped for the best. The river immediately grabbed the Zodiac and hurtled us toward the rapids. Loki spun to face the bow. "Can you help steer, pal?" "Woof, woof!" The dogbot wagged its makeshift tail, pointing its head to the left. I hoped Mary had upgraded the old Luna's language processor to interpret more than basic commands. Regardless, I turned the boat to follow Loki's nose. The first standing white wave smashed into the bow, bending the Zodiac. The next wave rose to twice the height. We plowed into it. Loki yelped and disappeared in the foaming water, and the tiny rubber craft tilted at an impossible angle. I leaned as far as I could in the opposite direction. Something heavy thumped against my leg. "Loki!" I cried with relief. "You weren't thrown out!" The rapids ended as fast as they started. We had cleared the island and the current was still strong, sweeping us quickly north away from our campsite. Better, there was nothing on the horizon behind us. Loki looked up at me and leaned against my leg. Over the next few days, low steel gray clouds rolled in, scouring the sky of the last vestiges of fall. Winter was coming, bringing an icy northern wind that sucked the heat from any exposed flesh. Stagnant pools along the river's edge glazed over with ice, and frequently, there was a skim of snow in the morning. The upside was that no drones could fly in the gusty winds, and no airship could see through the roiling winter clouds. Never sure how far behind the corporate agents were, we slept in the Zodiac so that we could leave on a moment's notice. Without the heat from Loki's cooling radiators, I would have quickly become hypothermic. But the river had been kind, slowing down to a steady current meandering north through the rolling hills of the boreal forest. "I figure it's only 30 or 40 kilometers to the border, Loki." "Woof!" She turned her eyes away from the skies to look at me, hopped over the seat and pawed my injured leg before settling onto the rubber deck. The heat from her radiators warmed my aching ankle, and for the first time, I began to believe we might make it. "Rip!" The Zodiac lurched as if it had momentarily hung up on something. Hiss! Air began escaping from one of the pontoons. I looked behind and saw jagged metal rods sticking out from a log, somehow floating just below the surface. Loki jumped to the bow and began barking. Ahead were more semi-submerged spiked logs. They weren't drifting with the current. Someone had anchored a field of them to the river bottom. "Woof! Woof!" Loki ran to the left side of the Zodiac. "I see it, pal!" There was a clearing with several abandoned buildings and a gap in the rocky shoreline where we could beach and repair the Zodiac. "It's too convenient, Loki. Someone's trying to force us ashore there." The dogbot whimpered. Freezing water was already sloshing over the deflating right side of the Zodiac. We had to land. The side collapsed as we beached. Loki jumped out and began sniffing around while I heaved critical supplies onto the rocks to save them from the river. The dogbot began to growl, and someone grabbed me from behind, dragging me out of the deflating Zodiac. "My ankle!" I cried as it bashed into a rock. 2 more dark figures jumped on me, pinning me to the ground. "Run, Loki, run! Get away!" One of the 3 who had me pinned yelped in pain. Cloth ripped as Loki tried to pull the man off. "Get that crazy bot off me," he yelled. "Shoot it, club it. The thing's got my leg." "Belay that," a woman ordered. "Don't damage the bot, you idiots. It's got a nuclear battery. You'll spread radioactive debris everywhere." "Loki, run," I pleaded. There was the scuttle of carbon fiber and titanium on loose rock, followed by a splash. "It's jumped into the river." Feet began to race across the rocks. "Let it go. A rogue, nuke-powered bot's not what we're here for. We'll report it," the woman directed. They zip-tied my hands behind my back, and I was jerked to my feet and roughly spun around. "My ankle," I complained again. A trim woman dressed in black tactical gear emblazoned with the words "Intellectual Property Enforcement" looked down and smiled at my leg. "Looks bad. That's good. It'll slow you down." "Dr. Tremblay, you're a hard man to find. I'm Field Agent Carmen Lopez, Synth Bio Investigations. Advanced Global Health Systems hired us to bring you in for a meeting. They want to talk. They want to shut me up and lock me away in a remote camp so I can't give away my gene mod for Alzheimer's." "Advanced Global Health Systems gene mod, doctor," the agent corrected. "Our job is to get you to that meeting, nothing more. It's between you and them after that. I hope you have good legal representation." A snowflake dropped onto her nose, stayed momentarily, then melted. Another landed in her dark hair. She looked up at the angry low clouds. "Unfortunately, your meeting with AGHS will have to wait one more day. A weather system is coming in, and we can't fly you out until tomorrow. Take Dr. Tremblay to our guest accommodations," she ordered. The 2 men holding me dragged me toward an old Quonset at the back of the clearing. One opened a human door beside a big rusting roll-up. The other pushed me into a small, empty, windowless storage room with a dirt floor, then zip-tied my feet. "Welcome to our guest suite, doctor," he joked. "No view, no room service." "Hey, I'll freeze in here," I protested. "Guess we can't let that happen. Our client wants you to be more or less alive." The bigger of the 2 laughed and tossed an old sleeping bag in after me. "Less is just as good as more," he threatened. "So behave." They slammed the door shut, barricading it from the outside. I felt my way over to the sleeping bag in the gloom. It smelt rank, and the stuffing was spilling out of a long gash. There was nothing else in the space, so I picked an interior wall, which I assumed would be warmer, propped myself up against it, wrapped the sleeping bag around me, and went to sleep. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I woke. Scratch, scratch. Had a wallboard beside me just moved? There was scuffling, then a series of thuds. Suddenly, several boards came loose and fell to the floor, leaving a gap. With servos whining, a welcome and familiar silhouette poked through the hole. "Loki," I whispered. "You shouldn't have come back." The dogbot's head swiveled toward me, and its long, cold rubber tongue enthusiastically licked my face. "It's great to see you, but you can't stay. You can't afford to be caught." "I can't leave. They've got me tied up." The dogbot's head tilted, licked me again, and sat, baring razor-sharp metal teeth. It took only a few seconds to chew through my bindings. "What now?" "I can't get far with my ankle," I said to the bot. What it did next surprised me. Loki started back through the hole in the wall, stopped partway, and turned. "You want me to follow?" The bot's tail wagged, and I went through the hole. The space on the other side was filled with the shadows of old equipment. Loki's eyes began to glow, providing just enough light to make out what was sitting in the middle, an ancient gas-powered ATV covered in plastic. Someone had been caring for the old beast. Loki pawed at the plastic. "Even if it still works, is there any fuel?" The bot jogged to a stack of jerry cans under another plastic sheet. I picked one up. It was full. Guess I have nothing to lose giving it a shot, right? Loki's tail wagged so vigorously its entire back end was swinging. Okay then. After uncovering and fueling the old machine, I found a snowsuit 2 sizes too big and zipped myself in. There was a large door at both ends of the Quonset. Choosing the one I thought was facing the tree line, I slowly cranked it open. Snow immediately raged in through the opening. Well, they're going to hear this, Loki. Are you ready? The dogbot put its head out into the blizzard, sniffed the air and whimpered. Here it goes. I was expecting the battery to be dead and nothing to happen. Instead, the ancient machine coughed, then stalled. What's that? Someone outside said. I tried again, and this time the machine sputtered to life. People began to run through the snow, yelling orders. Let's go, Loki, I said, gunning the throttle. The machine leapt forward, and Loki, barking, ran alongside. An arm reached out of nowhere and grabbed my leg, trying to pull me off. Help me get him, a man demanded. Headlamps winked on, making claustrophobic tunnels of light through the falling snow. More hands grabbed at me. I couldn't hold on much longer. A streak of metal, fur, and teeth leapt out of the dark. Another man screamed in pain. There was a shot and something whizzed by my ear. I cranked the steering back and forth to shake off the agent, still stubbornly holding my leg. Another flash of metal, red eyes, a scream of pain, and the hands were gone. I was free. The ATV bounced along the rough ground, picking up speed and heading blindly into the snow and darkness. I was going to hit a tree. A red beam flashed on, showing me the way. Loki was running in front, eyes like headlamps, guiding us. We left the camp along a narrow, winding trail, leaving chaos behind. The snow became more intense, deadening the sounds, and soon there was nothing but the snow, the trees, and the throbbing of the ancient gas engine. Loki slowed so the uneven ground wouldn't throw me off the ATV. Eventually we came to a road-sized break cut into the forest, which led off in 2 directions. Which way, pal? I asked. Loki stopped and tilted her head up as if she were listening. You've got a compass? Loki wagged her tail and barked. GPS had been a thing of the past since the Kessler event. She turned right. Before I followed, I looked behind at the tire tracks in the snow. Once the storm is over, we'll be easy to find, pal. Loki danced impatiently in tight circles. Yes, I know we need to get going. A thin band began to lighten the southern horizon. It was morning. We had only stopped to refuel the ATV from the jerry cans I had strapped to its back. The forest was quiet, and the motor was an angry intrusion in the landscape. Anyone could hear us a kilometer away. Worse, it had stopped snowing, and the clouds had cleared out. They'll be able to fly, I said, putting the ATV back into gear. The road ahead was a straight line north, a human-made wound in the tightly packed spruce. It wasn't so much a road as a place where a highway would be once the ground had frozen hard enough for trucks to pass over it, which meant we had to be close to the border. But there were no landmarks to announce its presence. Unlike the road, the border was only a human agreement, one I hoped my pursuers would respect. Loki's ears perked up. She stopped and twisted around. Behind us, a distant black dot in the sky quickly grew into a sleek VTOL. Get on, I ordered. Loki obeyed, and I opened the throttle on the ATV. Its engine roared and wheels spun until the tires gripped. There's no way we can outrun them, but we're going to try, I yelled over the growl of the engine. My only hope was that we were already at the border. The giant machine quickly overtook us and slowed momentarily to match our speed. There's no place for them to land, I laughed, but my optimism was short-lived. The helicopter-like plane zoomed ahead and hovered over the road, dropping several dark figures to the ground on ropes. Loki barked and jumped off the ATV, darting to the side. She turned to see if I had seen it. a narrow trail leading off into a thick stand of spruce trees. When they realized what we were doing, the black figures began to run. We made it to the trailhead first and plowed headlong into the frozen forest, tires kicking up rooster tails of fresh snow. The big VTOL buzzed overhead, trying to find us through the thick canopy of snow-covered needles. Then the ATV hit a rock hidden under the snow, throwing me off before flipping and crashing into a tree. Dazed, I tried to struggle to my feet, but couldn't. "My ankle!" I cried, suspecting this time it had been broken. Instantly, Loki was beside me, holding a long stick in her mouth. She had brought me a crutch. "I can't make it far," I admitted. Behind us, agents crunched through the undergrowth. Loki tugged my sleeve, and we limped away. We quickly came to a clearing containing a well-maintained, official-looking building. Loki pulled me out of the woods toward it just as the agents got to the wrecked ATV. Once clear of the trees, the dog bot stopped tugging and ran back toward the crash site. A few seconds later, someone yelled and cursed. Loki was trying to distract them so I could get to the building. The pain in my ankle was agonizing, and I fell. There was no way to make it on my own. Unexpectedly, someone pulled me to my feet, threw my arm over their shoulder, and half-dragged me toward the building. "Please wait," I asked the woman helping me. She was wearing an Alliance Border Patrol parka. "Loki? Loki?" I called. My heart sank when there was no reply. Suddenly the dog bot burst out of the forest with agents in hot pursuit. The heavily armed men stopped when they saw us. Loki ran into the middle of the clearing, barked, taunting them, and then turned to face me. "Come on, pal, we're safe now," I urged. Loki looked at me and wagged her tail before running toward the bush on the Alliance side of the border. She paused once more, and I swear managed to convey a smile that said, "I'll be all right." "Woof, woof." "Thanks for saving me, Loki," I replied and waved. The dog bot turned away and disappeared into the trees. If you'd like to connect with us, please email makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. Makeshift Stories is released around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written and read by Alan V. Hare. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdmann. Audio production and editing by Vecada Studios. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial, attribution, no derivative license.